Alright, my name is Jesus Nieto Barrera, and I did my senior project on learning how to play the song More Than Words by Eric Clapton. And basically how it happened was I started off with my little brother's guitar, and with that one it didn't work so well, the sound wasn't very well, and I had to tune it every couple, like 10, 20, 30 minutes at most, or at least I mean. And so after that I decided to get my own guitar, which is right here. It has a spruce wood head, which it's supposed to be the better sound quality as opposed to the other one where it's just a bunch of wood that's compressed. And this here is actually the song More Than Words, and then there's just some graphics, and then there's all the lyrics to the song. And that's kind of just my visual aid, so you know the song that I tried to learn, but I only spent about 10 to 20 hours on it, so I didn't learn it all, just parts of some of it. And so I had a couple stuff that I used learning along the way. I had an app called Musician on my phone, and basically what that did was it didn't show me anything specific about the song, but it did show like how to do certain chords and certain rhythms, and just kind of got me to get more on beat and not just be all over the place. I also used a website called Jelly Note, and that one didn't really teach me much. I just used it to kind of fill in gaps that the YouTube video I used didn't fill. The YouTube video I used was by a guy who has a website called Guitar Jams. I think his name is, I'm not sure what his name is, but it doesn't matter. And that's kind of how I learned the song mostly. It's how I learned the notes and the rhythm and just a lot of chords also. That's where I learned my first chords and notes, is from that video. And so, párate un poco para lado. No, párate un poco para lado.
Oh.
Yeah. And so, that's kind of where I started learning the chords and notes, and I learned a lot from that one. I learned how to play practically all of the song. The Jelly Note I just used for the transition between verses. And so, that's pretty much all I did for the playing part. I would practice like half an hour a day most days for about 2 months, and that got me pretty far considering where I started. And then my research paper, I decided to do my research paper on how playing the guitar is a good hobby to have just in life in general. And the first thing that it helps is your mental health. It's used as therapies already and has been forever. It's been proven in a study that if you just say Om for a while, that'll actually boost just your mental health in general. And then there have been studies that say that if you learn to play any musical instrument before the age of 7, it can boost your grades, your intellect, and not just that, but like your actual senses will get enhanced. They did a study where they took a bunch of musicians and non-musicians. They had both of them touch one thing, and when they touched that thing, it made 2 sounds. The musicians were able to tell that they only touched one thing, but the non-musicians thought that they touched 2 things. And that's where they kind of found that musicians kind of have their senses more honed, and they know, what they actually touched as apart from what they heard. And when you play music, what happens in your brain is usually when you think and just go about life, it creates certain connections in your mind. But when you play with an instrument, you have to not only read the music off the paper and play and listen to what's coming out, but you have to do all of that to a certain rhythm while other people are watching. That creates a lot of varied connections in the brain, and it helps create like a stronger connection between the left and right hemispheres, and it creates a lot of extra brain tissue in a lot of very vital areas that help in a lot of not just schoolwork, but like actual intellect. And a great example of how it can help your mental health is there's a guy named Robert Gupta. He plays in the Disney Concert Hall Sinatra, and he's very talented. He met a man who was called Nathaniel Ayers. This guy suffered from schizophrenia. He went to Juilliard Music School, which is a very prestigious school for music, and he had to quit partway through because he had an outburst. He had schizophrenia. He freaked out. He couldn't go through with it. Had a mental breakdown. He dropped out. Well, a while later, he sees Robert Gupta, and they start talking about music. Well, he asks Gupta to train him, to teach him lessons on the violin. Well, the first day comes, and he was never completely cured of schizophrenia, up to that point at least, and he refused treatment because the treatment that he was used was shock therapy and just stuff that traumatized him. Well, when the lesson started, he was already having a bad day. He was just shaking. He wasn't looking good. So Gupta, as opposed to just starting to talk all this like really sophisticated violin jargon, he decided to just start playing instead. And he says that in his eyes, he saw him go from just rage and crazy to understanding. And he started talking with Ayers over the years, and he taught him how to play the violin. Ayers could pick up a violin and play bits and pieces of sonatas and concertos that he'd heard. And of course, he would have Gupta finish them because he wasn't trained on the violin at that point, but he could still play them. And Gupta actually said that he not only had an encyclopedic knowledge of it, but a deep passion for music. And it was that music that he learned to play and spoke of that eventually got him to live a normal life. His schizophrenia was no longer an obstacle for him. He overcame an actual mental illness with music. And it doesn't just help you mentally, it can also help you physically. Like I said before, you have to not only play, but you also have to read, and that helps a lot with hand-eye coordination. You get to do two things at once better. And if you play a wind instrument, it really helps with your breathing. You have to control your breathing. You have to be able to take bigger breaths and let them out at different speeds at different times. And then it was actually shown in a study that if you hear negative sounds, it has a negative effect on your body as a whole. If you're at work and let's say there's construction work right across the street, you're going to be agitated. You're going to feel like you need to get out, and if you can't get out, that's going to have a very negative effect on your body, wasting unnecessary energy, not being able to focus, reducing productivity. Speaking of productivity, this is a very productive and efficient hobby. It helps you a lot through life, and it helps you a lot through everything. As opposed to like other hobbies that people might have, like video games, which is just, video games is often turned into an addiction, which can lead to a lot of very serious problems, not only health, but in like socially and in your life, because you won't be able to go out and do anything if you're addicted to video games. As opposed to the guitar, it's not a naturally addictive hobby. The video games is. Companies make money off of you getting addicted to their games and playing them over and over and over. People don't make as much money by you getting addicted to this. And not just that, but this has been, when you play an instrument, people often play in bands or orchestras or concerts. And that makes you interact with other people in a way that isn't just talking, but you actually have to communicate with them and learn to play as one. And it really helps you with your social skills. Not to mention, like I said with Ayers, he was able to love music and to speak about music in a way that cured him of his mental illness. That same, it can help us finding out who we are. You learn a lot by just playing music and creating it and getting in touch with how you really feel. Because when you hear positive music, when you hear music that reflects what you're feeling at that moment, it has a really positive effect on you and your life as a whole. And then to finish off, I'm just going to play what I know or what I learned from that YouTube video and whatnot. And here it is. Oh, messed up. Thanks.
¿Cómo se apaga?
That's not the phone. That.